This is Robin Booth, and I'm coming all the way from beautiful Mozambique, and I want to share with you one of the things that I'm most passionate about in being a professional property investor is finding such incredible deals in places where you never thought they'd be. And I want to show you one that I just found this afternoon that really gets me really excited. So here we are on the outside, right? You can have a look and see that this house that I have stumbled across in my walking is really run down, right? You can see the roof is falling in. Obviously the plastering is not done, but just take a look as we go inside what this potential has, right? So taking into account, yes, it's got some rehab, but how about this view? This is just one of the most spectacular places right here on the rocks, just ready for someone to snap up, to create, to rehab, to make it into something spectacular. And then there it goes. It's also got an understory underneath with just as great views. Two bedrooms, two bathrooms, both en suite. Just absolutely incredible. This is what's so exciting about being a professional property investor, is just coming across places like this where you can literally just make something of it and create an amazing place. There we go. Professional property investor Robin Booth in Mozambique. How about this view? Spectacular. And just out here are the whale sharks. We saw a whale shark 10 minutes ago, and the manta rays, and this is where they come and dive for them. Absolutely spectacular. So one of the most important things that we know about investing in property is to buy right from the start. In other words, we want to make sure that we're not fixing problems later on, whether it is that we ran incorrect numbers or that the deal wasn't even good from the first place. So in this lesson, we're really going to take a look at some of the questions that you can ask and should be asking either the agent or the seller, so that you can actually be, safeguard and minimize the risk of buying a wrong property. And this is actually an article that I got off the website, but actually it's such a useful article, and I actually want to expand on some of those points, which are the questions that you need to ask an agent or a seller before you buy. So let's get going. So the first question is, why are they selling? Why is the seller actually selling the home? Because this can actually lead to some of the issues that might be there. It could also lead to perhaps you having an insight into better negotiating a deal with them. For example, if a seller is needing to access liquidity quickly, in other words, they have to sell quickly so that they can free up cash because maybe they've got a debt to pay, or they've got to pay for their children's education or a new car or some other reason, then of course that also gives us some bargaining power. If it is that they've just moved in a year ago and they're selling because there's a problem with the house, well, they will also have to disclose that, right? And those are kind of the reasons we want to find out. Why is the seller selling the property in the first place? So first and foremost, we always want to know that, so that we can avoid the possible problem that they're selling because of crime in the area, or because their neighbor had a break-in or something happened there. So always ask, why is the seller selling the property? The next one is, what is actually included in the sale? So this is a mistake that many people make, which is they buy a property or they see a property and there it's got a special fridge, or it's got a built-in stove, or it's got certain features which they assume are going to be as part of the sale. In one of the houses that I actually built, I had custom made very special cupboards out of indigenous wood, and I always said in the back of my mind that when I sell this property, I'm going to take that furniture with me. Even though it was kind of installed into the property, I was clear that I was going to take it with me because it's custom made furniture specific with the indigenous wood that I created, right? So again, you need to actually articulate and ask, what is actually going to be sold with this property? Is it going to be the stove, the hob, especially the light fittings? Because some people have really beautiful fancy chandeliers, and you want to know that you're going to get that, because there you see it in the dining room hanging over the table, and the next thing you know is actually they're saying they're going to take it with you. So always just ask, what is included in the sale of the property, so you can get clear on that, right? And obviously that needs to be articulated in your offer to purchase as well. Next, how long has the property been on the market? Now, you can often find this out through the different means and different online sites. You can see when it was first published or first put online. But of course, a property that's been marketed for more than 2-3 months is already going to tell you that it is probably overpriced, or that there's something there that is preventing people from saying, I want to buy this right now because I believe it's a good deal. So on the one hand, if it has been there for a long period of time, that should trigger for you that, maybe I could negotiate a better price down, a much better price, because obviously they are probably wanting to sell, and if it isn't selling, then it probably means that it's overpriced. So they're going to be more ready to negotiate a better price. So always bear in mind that as a seller, they always think their property is worth more than usual, the current market analysis that comes through. So sometimes the seller says to the agent, no, I believe that your report is wrong. I want to start higher, and then over time we'll work our way down. Well, the market will tell you if that's true or not. And if it's been listed for a long period of time, well, that gives you an indication that it was overpriced, or that there is something that's not working. It could be perhaps the neighborhood is really going through some changes and people are just not looking at that neighborhood anymore. But the length of time that that property has been listed for will highlight for you some of the strategies that you can use to buy the property. So good information for you to gather from that, right? How long have the present owners lived on the property? So this for me is really important, because I prefer to purchase properties that the owner has actually lived there for a long period of time, because it triggers a certain number of things for me. One, usually owners look after their property more than if they're investors, or if they're renters, or if it's just a quick in and out. So they have a tendency to have looked after it and to have maintained it, or to have done it correctly. In other words, if they've added something on or built, then they would have done it for themselves firstly, because it wasn't going to be an investment, it was their home. So that will give us an indication of what's going on. Also, if it is that they've lived there for a certain period of time, it's worthwhile looking to see what the general trends are in the neighborhood. You can actually find that out on, I think Lightstone, for example, actually tells you the movement and the age groups of people in a suburb, which is incredibly useful, especially if you're trying to ride that wave of the transformation. If it is that you've got young and upcoming families moving in, well, that's a good indication of what kind of house you could buy and rent out. In other words, your market, if you're going to rent it out, which is why we're investing, needs to match the demographics of the people moving into the neighborhood. So you want to check those out and obviously find out who is there and how long they've been there and what is going on. Another option, of course, is to also ask the neighbors. You want to know how long the neighbors have also been in those houses, because you want to see what the general trend is, right? When I invest in America, one of the criteria for buying an investment home is to make sure that over 50% of that neighborhood are owner-owned homes. And that's because a neighborhood that has more owners than renters is generally going to look better and have appreciating value. You can imagine that if you're going to a neighborhood where it's just renters who are looking after it, well, one, they're probably not looking after it, which means you will see it in the road verges, you will see it in the neatness of the gardens or of the fence or in the maintenance. So we prefer to look for neighborhoods where there's more owners living actually in the home. So it's worthwhile knowing that one. Has the property repeatedly changed ownership over a period of time? So that will also give an indication if it's gone through a large number of sales within the last few years, because why would someone buy and then a year or two later sell? And if this repeats over a certain period of time, that will also be an indication that there might be something else not working. It could be that the damp rises, or that there's leaks in the roof that aren't noticed, or there's something else there that's not right, maybe the crime in the area. So check to see the cycle through which that property has been bought and sold within the last few years. How did the agent who you're working with or who is selling the property arrive at that listed price? Now, usually agents will just punch in the numbers into their property current market analysis programs, whether it's Lightstone, whether it's CMA, whether it's Windeed. All of those programs will kick out a certain number. But what most people don't know is that the person who is using that program can actually manipulate it to work better for you. This is a real thing you need to consider. For example, a current market analysis is looking in the general area and saying within the last few months, which are the properties that have been sold, what's their listing price, how many beds and bathrooms, and based on this average calculation, it's going to come up with what it thinks that property that you're looking at should be valued at. But what you can also do is you can actually go into the back end of those programs and actually say, please exclude these top priced properties, or you could exclude the bottom price properties, and of course that will impact the average. So I like to use that when I'm going to a property and offering a price which is going to be lower, because I'm going to take off all the high price properties in the average, and therefore the average will be lower. So I can actually say, look here, your property is not valued as what you're predicting it's going to be. And the same can be for when you're selling it. You take off the lower valued homes, so therefore the average increases, so you can actually show the prospective buyer that according to the market analysis, it's actually higher than what they think that they should be paying. So those are tricks, techniques which everyone uses. Use them to your advantage, but know how they work so that you don't get trapped into an agent showing you a figure and you think, well, that must be the truth because that's the market analysis. They probably could have tweaked it so that it actually increased that value, and therefore you could just be suckered into that. So take note of that. What is the minimum price that the agent will accept? Now, of course, no agent is going to go and say, listen, they're only going to accept, this price and no lower, but it's always worthwhile asking, because it does give an indication of whether the listed market value is still negotiable. Always ask. There's no harm in asking. The worst that can happen is they say no, and then you can just keep negotiating from that. So always ask, what is the lowest or the minimum amount that the seller will accept as a good starting point, right? What offers have there been made so far? So again, these are the tricks and techniques that a lot of agents use. They tend to say, oh, you need to make an offer soon because I've got 4 other offers that are pending. Well, those are the kind of games they play. I always say to agents right up front, I say, whatever the offers are, whether you're lying or not, please don't tell me. Don't even try and convince me that I need to rush this, because as soon as that happens, I'm not there. I'm not going to play an emotional, dramatic game between the seller and the agent and get caught up into the hype of making mistakes. There are enough good deals out there for us to be strategic, to be careful, to be cautious, and to make the right move. It's in the buying of the property that we get our first foot in the door, and that ensures that we're going to have long-term success. So even though they might say, well, it had an offer of X amount, or there are 3 offers at that amount, take your time and make sure that you're doing your numbers correctly and you know what your top and lowest bracket is, so that you can actually be strategic around this and not get sucked into the emotion. Remember, we're professional property investors. This is not an emotional decision for us. This is a strategic, calculated move, and therefore it's worthwhile knowing what other people have offered, if they have, so we can adjust our strategy as well. Why or when do the sellers have to move out? Now, sometimes the seller has already found another place and they've put an offer on that place that is conditional that their home is sold. It could also be that they have bought and moved into another place and now their home is vacant. In other words, the one that you're wanting to buy. Knowing when the seller needs to move out by will also influence the occupational rent category, right? Because even though it might take 2 to 3 months to transfer, you might want to move in earlier or get a tenant in earlier, or you might not want to, such that it stays there for longer. And if that seller also says, well, we only need to move out in 8 months' time because our new house will only be ready then you know that you want to obviously create a higher occupational rent in the offer to purchase. Because remember, you're going to sign an offer to purchase, and in that offer to purchase will have the occupation rent, which means that if you move in before transfers happened, you're going to be paying occupational rent. And if they're still in the house after transfers happen, because now you'll be the new owner, they're in effect going to be renting from you. So that's where the occupational rent is going to be. So you want to carefully consider that, and to know that is by when they need to move out. It also will give you an indication if you can negotiate them further on this, because if they need to move out ASAP to move into their new house, well, again, you know that therefore they're in a rush or they're needing that sale quite quickly, which will give you greater leverage. This is all about a kind of tactic of understanding what the seller's needs are so that we can meet them. Because you can either negotiate on price, or you can negotiate on terms. Right? Terms are when the property is transferred or when you take occupation. So that does actually make a big impact. For example, if you're buying a student house, ideally you probably want transfer to happen or occupation to be taken around November, December, so you can put in some of your alterations to start from 1st of January with the new intake. If you're buying a property for student housing in the middle of the year, it's going to be a lot more challenging for you to fit it up quickly. So we want to strategically position in that offer to purchase when we take occupation and when we take transfer, so that we can maximize or minimize, I guess, the expenses we have to pay up front, but maximize the potential that we are needing. Also in the Airbnb, if you're buying an apartment that you want to Airbnb, it's great to do that closer to the end of the year when all the prices in the Airbnb skyrocket, because that's when people go on holiday and they go and actually use Airbnb in different places. So again, you can start with a really high income producing few months, which will minimize the risk of the lower months. So again, knowing when the owners want to move out gives you an indication into how you can strategize with them further. Next one, has any major work been done on the property? So that's a really important one, because we want to know what work has been done, major works, alterations of a bathroom or bedroom, or refurbished, or if they've added on new things, because many people buy properties and then only later realize that alterations have been done without the proper building plans, and then they're in trouble, either because now they're going to have to resubmit, which is going to cost, there could be fines, or of course in some cases could be demolished. We've had a situation where a building looked fantastic and they had a new room right butting up onto the neighbor's wall, and of course that hadn't been approved and they actually had to take it down. The new owners had to take it down because it was actually too far into the no-go zone for them to do that, and that was all to their cost. So again, be really careful and ask their questions. Is there any major work that has been done? What has been done? And have they got approved plans? If they don't, that's okay. You just need to state that as part of your offer to purchase as a conditional suspensive condition that says this offer to purchase is subject to the building plans of the existing buildings being approved. And in that way, you know that that will need to be done by the seller, and the cost of getting those plans and the approval will be to the seller's account and therefore not you, and you can avoid that risk, right? So very important. Are any of the plans available for the property? So even though you might find that the plans have been approved, it's always useful to have the plans available, especially if you are the kind of investor who's looking to see how to maximize the yield in the property. You might have a 4-bedroom house with a double garage, but you're wanting to use this in a slightly different setup as student housing or multiple house of occupation. You might want to convert the garage, and therefore actually having plans will enable you to work off that directly, as opposed to just trying to sketch it in your head and then you can't get it right. So always useful to actually get copies of the plans, or at least photographs of the plans, so that you can see that straight away. How old is the property? This is going to be important just from the perspective of you seeing how it has maintained over the years, and of course in understanding some of the legalities, especially around lead-based paint and asbestos issues. Some of the older properties have those concerns, but mostly those have been resolved. But we always want to know the age of a property. That will also give us an indication of the electrical quality of the system. In other words, how outdated is it? Because obviously with all the adjustments that the municipalities are bringing in and all the eco-friendly requirements, understanding when it was built may also help you to determine what might be needed in the compliance of a future sale. So that's always an important part to take into account. One interesting question is to ask if you can move some of the furniture to take a look at what's going underneath, because you'll find that many people will cover stains in carpets, or they'll put cupboards over certain areas where there's a lot of scratching, or if there's a lot of damp, they'll put a cupboard up against a damp wall that hides the damp, right? So we want to just ask, is it okay if I move the furniture to take a look underneath or to look behind? That again is going to give us an indication of if they're trying to use techniques and tricks to hide defects of the property, which of course we want to know, right? Especially with damp in carpets, floors, and behind walls or behind cupboards. So ask, can I move the furniture to look underneath? And we see how they respond to that, right? Do you have noisy neighbors? Now, yes, neighbors come and go, but one of the main things that we don't want, especially if you're in a quiet suburb, are a bunch of neighbors next door that are noisy. So always ask that, because that is something which again could impact your ability to keep a long-term tenant. If you have a neighborhood that's young and rowdy and party-like, well, you're going to struggle with keeping tenants who are actually just looking for peaceful weekends or peaceful evenings. So always useful to ask about neighbors. Also, because when you're possibly doing things like student housing, we want to know the quality of our neighbor, because neighbors in the realm of student housing or house of multiple occupation are the biggest downfall of managing a student house. Because if you've got a nosy, a very picky neighbor, they're going to complain the whole time, and council will only come and speak to you and check you if they find out about what you're doing or are unhappy about what you're doing. And it's your neighbors who are going to report you for some reason. Report you and saying there's too much noise, or there's too many unfamiliar people walking into your house, or there's too many cars parked on the road because you've got 5 different people staying at your location, at your house. So the neighbors are actually really important. And later on, I'm going to have specific lessons around how to manage neighbors so that they work for you as opposed to against you. So look out for that one. Is there traffic or aircraft noise? So again, really useful. I remember staying in an apartment once that had that was on a quite a busy road, and that wasn't the problem. But it was right near an intersection where the taxis kept hooting at the people walking at the intersection to check if they wanted to take a lift. So from 6 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, the hooters of the taxis were going the whole time, and it totally disrupted my sleep and what I was wanting, and I would definitely not stay there for any length of time. So again, ask about those certain things, and actually maybe even check that if you're considering that it is too close to an intersection where taxis and other motorists could be making a lot of noise, whether it is through revving their cars or of course through hooting the taxis as they come past, right? Very important. Perhaps one of the most important things, especially if you're an inexperienced property investor and you're not familiar with buildings, is to ask if you can get a home inspection report done. It will cost you a few £1,000, but it is well worth it, because a qualified inspector will come through and will look at the whole property and actually give you an indication of what could be wrong and obviously what you may need to do to get it right. Now, this is incredibly useful, one, just to support you in avoiding the risk of what you could possibly be liable for later on, but actually it also gives you some meat in your negotiation, right? Some substance in negotiating, because if the home report comes back and says that the roof will need to be replaced in 2 years, and that there is damp in this area, and the electrical circuits are getting old and will need to be replaced, that allows you to actually negotiate a better price as well. So having that home report not only gives you peace of mind, but can actually work for you in your favor. And again, remember, we're doing professional property investing because we want to obviously create a consistent income with the least expenses, and we want to manage our risk. So if we can manage the risk, then everything above that is a bonus, is the upside. So the more we know about a property, the more we can predict what it's going to look like and be in maintenance costs, the better. So again, don't fall into the trap even that just because this is a new property, maybe 2 years old or 3 years old, that they won't have defects or that they might not have something wrong with them. So it is advisable to get a home inspection, a property home inspection from a professional who will come out and check the property and give you a report on all those items. And in that way actually could be saving you money, especially if it is that there's a lot going on with the property and therefore you actually say no thank you. Remember that wealth is also created by saying no to the wrong properties, and it's not just about saying yes to the right properties. So there are a whole lot of different points that you can ask a seller or the agents of the seller, such that you can become an informed professional property investor.